Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Blog Talk Radio.
Party tonight! TV party tonight! TV party tonight! TV party tonight! We're gonna have a TV party tonight! Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight! Alright! We'll pass out on the couch! Alright! Tonight! We got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Don't talk about anything else. We don't wanna know! We're dedicated to our favorite shows!
And tonight, our favorite show is The Crown, brought to you by the good people at Netflix. Tonight, we're going to discuss the first 10 episodes, otherwise known as Season 1. And to join me in this endeavor, helping me out, our historian, our history expert, our man with the plan, our Canadian, our friend from the north, Mr. Andrew Graham. How do you do, sir?
I'm doing good, Mark. How are you doing today?
I can't complain, and if I did, no one would listen. By
the way, happy Hanukkah.
Mazel tov. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated, and a happy holiday to you and yours across the border. So let's get into this. I'm excited to talk about this with you tonight. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to say right off the bat that we're going to kind of talk about this the way that we dealt with Five Came Back. You know, we're going to talk about some themes, performances, actors, that sort of thing. We're not going to do an episode-by-episode breakdown. Here's why. I got to episode 5. I still need to finish it. But I didn't want to put the show off. I wanted to talk about it, and I felt like I got a gist of what was happening to be able to discuss the show. Obviously, whatever happens in episodes 6 through 10, that's important. I'll leave to Andrew to talk about. But my first question to you, Andrew, is wherein lies your interest in this show? What made you excited to talk about it with me?
Well, I think I'm going to have to put a quick pin in that one because we actually have a third player on tonight's game.
Woo!
Joining us tonight is Alicia Graham, my brilliant and lovely wife, to also talk about this show, which we just recently rewatched.
Hi.
Hello, Alicia. Very, very happy to have you on the show. I'm Mark, the host of this here gig, and I'm Andrew said that you might be joining us, and I'm happy to have you here.
Well, we got lucky. Andrew was able to get both kids down to sleep, so I could join.
I'll throw it to you first then. Same question. Wherein lies your interest in the show? What made you tune into it and feel passionate enough to talk about it here on TV Party Tonight?
Well, I don't know if I feel comfortable talking about it, but you can blame my husband for that one. But for me, The Crown was just such a cool concept, more about our own monarchy. That's one, I've always been fascinated by the monarchy, and we follow it a lot closer up here just because it's part of our constitution, it's part of our government. And Elizabeth is such a unique character in history, and I wanted to kind of get that unique perspective of her in her youth and all the things that she's been through, because it's been a lot.
So, a couple of things about me. I have no relationship to royal anything. I've never followed a monarchy. I barely know it exists. My wife, on the other hand, huge fan. When somebody got married, I guess in the last couple of years, and that was televised, my wife and her mother watched it on TV. My wife is huge into this show. She's big into another show that I guess used to be on the CW called Reign, which is currently on Netflix. She watches The Royals. If she's not watching Bad Housewives behaving badly, she's watching something having to do with royalty. So I get that. But for someone like me, no clue. I didn't know. And you're really going to have to walk me through this like a child, because I don't know what all is the attraction to specifically Queen Elizabeth. Honestly, what I know about Queen Elizabeth, I learned from Eddie Izzard. You know who Eddie Izzard is?
Okay.
Fair enough.
So all I know about this woman is she's a frumpy old lady who has a cake on her head. That's it. Prince Philip, apparently he's an idiot. That's all I know. So I will appreciate your insight. Okay. Go ahead, Andrew. Why don't you chime in here with your thoughts here? And actually, walk me through what exactly... Now, I know Canada used to be part of the British Empire, but you're not currently, are you? You're your own separate sovereign nation, from what I thought, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, well, we certainly are, and we have our own sovereignty, and basically what's happened over the last 100 years or so, as the various what were colonies or what were called that, and what have been called from time to time dominions, have basically all asserted their own independence, and then basically joined what's called the Commonwealth. So I can't even remember how many countries are in the Commonwealth, but it's close to 100. Yeah. And most of these countries, at the very least, generally fall into the category of constitutional monarchies. So there is a monarch at the head of it, but there's a full government below it. And these are ones that all kind of acknowledge Her Majesty as being the head of state. So basically, and then what we have is a prime minister that's then the head of government. So it's a little bit different from, say, the U.S., where you guys have basically the head of state and head of government all rolled into one body.
Yes, one giant orange body that can't seem to stay off Twitter.
I wasn't going to go making that joke first, so.
It's fine. It's fine. We love Trump here on the Religion Broadcasting Network. He's fantastic. Anywho. All right, so not to be a complete idiot, but so Canada, the Queen is Queen Elizabeth, correct?
Yeah, she's the Queen of Canada.
Okay, got it.
She's on all of the money. She's
Yep. Any bill that passes in Parliament has to be given what's called royal assent, basically a sign-off from there. It's more or less ceremonial at this point. There hasn't been a non-giving of royal assent since, I think, the 1920s.
Queen Elizabeth
and that's generally
suddenly going
by
to
the Queen herself by what's called the Governor General, which is basically her representative in Canada that basically serves as the head of state when she is not here.
So Queen Elizabeth isn't suddenly going to get up one day and says, you know what? You can't have universal health care. Fuck it. I'm taking it back. She can't do that.
No, she can't.
Okay.
And she wouldn't.
She wouldn't, no.
Fantastic. Good to know that we have this great this historical base to work from here.
I'll Brexit by now.
Okay. Your thoughts, Andrew. I mean, your lovely wife gave her thoughts on the show and what drew her to it. Similar thing? Something else there for you?
I mean, definitely a similar thing. I mean, when you look at the fact that, Her Majesty has been, or Queen Elizabeth has been reigning for, 60 odd years at this point. I mean, she's seen a tremendous amount of change over that time. I mean, she took power right after, her reign began rather, right after, India and Pakistan both left the British Empire, and then you've kind of seen the world shift a lot with her, and she's definitely been very much a mark of stability. I mean, on top of that, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stories, some of which are more credible than others. I'm gonna definitely take a step back on getting into some of the nitty gritty on the history here, because very frankly, trying to get into the personal histories of the royals at this point is probably going to be more effort than it's worth, because I think there's probably a lot of dodgy accounts out there. Probably, if anything, I found better stuff on Netflix, where there's a couple of good ones, including a couple of good documentaries that actually get access to the royal archives, so you can see actual letters going back and forth and things like that. So I can definitely provide a little bit of larger context. One thing I will say, just kind of, since you asked the questions about Canada, I mean, definitely when you use the phrase the crown, and that's going to be a big theme in this series, is that the crown is actually not only, of course, the queen, but the state itself. So when, let's say, you get brought up on criminal charges, it's not you versus the province of Alberta or the Dominion of Canada or anything like that. It's you versus the crown. We don't have district attorneys, we have crown prosecutors. As Alicia mentioned, you know, the Her Majesty's on all the back of our coins, and members of the royal family are pretty thoroughly integrated into our military culture, where we've got past regiment names have been through the members of the royal family. Probably one of the best ones known for that is one of our infantry regiments called the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry.
Okay. Let's get into the actual show here. And I think we need to spend some time just talking about Queen Elizabeth, the person, how she's portrayed on the show by Claire Foy. And as I said, I'm not going to go through episode by episode, and I really want you, Alicia, please feel free to just jump in at any time. You know, express yourself as you will. You know, you don't necessarily have to wait for me to cue you. As Andrew knows, we tend to do a little cueing just to prevent people from talking over each other. But I really want you to just relax and, you know, feel comfortable just sharing whatever stream of consciousness, you know, tends to come to your mind about this. But I want to get into Claire Foy as Queen Elizabeth, Princess Elizabeth, as she starts off in the show, and just talking about. I don't have a specific question, just some ideas I have in my head here. How close the portrayal is to what we think we know about her in real life. Did we enjoy Claire Foy's performance as Queen Elizabeth? Were there some issues with it? Like I said, this could have all been. I mean, I know it to be based on historical fact. This could have all been fiction for all I knew. So I'm looking. This is kind of the opposite of Jesse Starcher on the Metal Hammer of Doom. This is where I need to be educated, as opposed to educating people who are listening. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it all the way over to Alicia here. Tell me your thoughts on Queen Elizabeth and Claire Foy portraying Queen Elizabeth.
Well, appearance-wise, she's right on the mark. It's actually almost scary how much she looks like pictures. And if you look at old pictures of Elizabeth and old pictures of Philip, I mean, they cast this very well in the look. In personality, there's not a lot known about Elizabeth in her early years, at least nothing that I don't know a lot about it. I thought she's very good, but I personally struggled a little bit with how nervous she was and how kind of passive she was in the early years. It very well could be true, but I think I've grown up with Elizabeth in the later years, and I've always seen her as a very confident, very strong female monarch. And so while I enjoyed watching Claire's take on it and the show's take on it, I'll admit the first few episodes I struggled a little bit because it was like she was almost too passive to what I think of Elizabeth as. It very well could be, like I said, true because she was very young when she took the throne, but I that was the only part that I was like, the look is perfect. Her person, like her, like little quirkiness of how she walks and how she moves is very accurate. She obviously did her studying, but there was a passiveness there that I, like I said, could have been there, but I struggled with watching it a little bit because I see her as such a strong female role model.
Andrew?
You are
very much in line with Alicia. Like there are moments where Claire Foy's inflection, her mannerisms, the way she holds her hands is very, very dead on to how Elizabeth II actually speaks, actually moves, actually presents herself. It's a little jarring in some cases. So, and I mean, I think it is. I mean, again, I don't know that much about Her Majesty in the early years, particularly a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff we get into, like her audiences with Churchill and things like that. But you definitely do get a read of this is somebody who is new to this role and is kind of learning the ropes in a lot of ways.
And also, who
one thing I can
long before she expected to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's made very clear in the show that ideally there would have been more time spent with her father, the king, before she took over the role, and she just kind of got thrown into it out of necessity. And I mean, the man died of cancer, presumably. One thing I wholeheartedly agree with: the first episode or two, I really struggled with. Not to say that I wasn't enjoying it. The show looks marvelous. It's a very exquisitely shot show. The set design, costumes, everything. It's all very enthralling. I think just because, again, this might have I have an easier time with science fiction, than I had trying to understand this world that I was thrown into with episode 1. And so it was a little struggle for me to get through. Once she becomes queen, I saw that that's the story. It's her taking on this role and growing into it, and the struggles therein, which we definitely need to talk about her and Philip and their marriage, sort of against the expectations of the crown. But yeah, once we got there, the show became a lot more easier for me to digest. Getting there was a bit trying. Though, like I said, it has nothing to do with performances. I think it was just kind of an overwhelming first episode for me. One thing you both brought up was her passivity at the onset. And I'll tell you, one of the things that actually surprised me, and I'll give you both a chance to react to this, is I had no idea that the Queen was even passively involved in government. I honestly thought that that the Prime Minister and whatever you like, Parliament, I guess, dealt with the law, and the royalty just kind of sat in observation. So looking at details like the red box and the king specifically saying, I turn everything over to see what they don't want me to see first. What you were saying, Andrew, about them sort of giving the okay on some of these laws, not that they wouldn't, but that it's still a part of the process. All that was new and very interesting to me. And I'm curious. I was curious to know just how much she was how before she takes over as queen, how much did she know about the government? In other words, she has to weigh in on some of this stuff to some degree. Does she have a working knowledge of the kinds of laws these people are going to pass to even weigh in? It was all fascinating to me. Alicia, what are some of your thoughts here?
Well, Elizabeth was very well educated, and this actually goes, I can't remember which episode.
Episode 7.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
They actually go into her past education. And she specifically, they talk about how when she was young, she really is well educated in the Constitution. And, she, of course, got very well educated in manners and in presentations and stuff, but she is very well versed in the Constitution and in laws. When it comes to science and other more
general knowledge,
she wasn't taught like an average kid. and struggles with that. But one of the unique things about Elizabeth is she took it upon herself once she was in the role to learn. She brought in tutors, and that actually becomes part of the show, where she brought in a tutor to teach her all of this general knowledge that she didn't get as a kid, so that she could be knowledgeable enough to not only converse with people who had those degrees and had that information, but also weigh in on it.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of an interesting thing that's kind of happened with the royal family when you look at the overall history is the level of education that some of the monarchs have had. Like compare, Elizabeth II to Elizabeth I, who was the queen in the 1500s up to about 1600, and I mean she was probably one of the best. Elizabeth I was one of the best educated monarchs in Europe at the time. She had tutors. She spoke several languages. She was well read. And by the time that you came around to Elizabeth II, that wasn't as much of a priority. It was about, because they weren't expected to be involved in the brass tacks, as much in the brass tacks running the country. That said, with how complicated the world was at this point, you need to get into some of that information. So you're starting to already see that swing the other direction where, both Harry and, looking at the current royals, both Harry and William have both been to university. I believe Charles went to university, and I believe at least one of his brothers went to university as well. But there's only about 4 members in kind of the top 6 line that have been to university.
Let's get into one of 2 of my favorite characters in this whole thing, Prince Philip. And again, I got to reference Eddie Izzard here. What I know of Prince Philip is the jokes that Eddie Izzard has made that may or may not have been based on something he actually said, like "Don't stay too long in China, your eyes will get all slitty." There was something else that he said. He made some other dumb remark, allegedly, and he doesn't necessarily come across as a dummy on the show, though he does have a great line, and I think it's episode 2 where they're in Africa, and he approaches I guess the tribal leader, the king, and he's like, "I like your hat," and mortified.
I remember that.
Elizabeth looks at him and goes, "It's not a hat, it's a crown." And he's like, "All right."
Well, one of the gentlemen he walks up to and he points at one of his medals and he says, "You can't have that. That's fake." What he was pointing at was what's called the Victoria Cross, which is the Commonwealth equivalent of the Medal of Honor.
I'm surprised you liked Philip so much. He's such a controversial character in the show.
I felt for him. I honestly did. This is when you look at it from 2017, where we've come in a lot of ways very, very far in the genders being equal, and certainly we have further to go, much further to go. But this certainly isn't 1950. We have made progress. I think that's fair to say. But if you look, if you look back to the 1950s and you see, this man of the house, this leader of the family, having constantly being undermined and in a lot of ways emasculated because his wife is the queen of the country, the queen of the empire. I mean, you're talking about a very deeply personal issue with this guy, and I felt for him. I thought Matt Smith did an excellent job of portraying him, and I based that on absolutely nothing, but the performance itself was enthralling for me. Again, I don't know anything about the guy in real life, but I thought that here you have this person who is constantly trying to exert himself as a man should, especially of that time, and he just gets a barrage of nope. She can't take your name. The children can't take your name. You can't fly. You can't do this. Put yourself in his position, and even take out the gender part of it. Just any person who's constantly being told your life is not your own. You have to live it. You have to live it this way, this expected way. and how you might handle that. I'll give you guys a chance to react to what I'm saying. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I think Matt Smith and his portrayal of Prince Philip is quite engaging, and I think on some level he definitely comes across as a sympathetic character. I mean, not only is he an outsider to the family, but he's kind of an outsider in general. So I mean, he made a line in one of the, I think it's in one of the later episodes, where it's like, my grandfather was killed, my father had to flee, and I was smuggled out of the country in an orange box. And that wasn't too far off. Like, I mean, this was, and this kind of ties into one of the big themes of the show, and a lot of where the conversation is underlying, is that at this point in time, monarchies were falling left, right, and center. Like, I mean, you had the Habsburgs go in Austria, you had the Romanovs fall in Rome, you had in Russia. Sorry, I'm reading a Russia book right now. It slipped in there. You had the Kaiser fall, and all of these people were relations of some degree or another. Like, I mean, one of the things they talk about is the importance of names, and I mean, Mountbatten, his last name, his royal house is an Anglicanization of Battenberg, which at the time, basically, before 1917, the royal house wasn't known as Windsor; they were known as Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which was obviously a very German-sounding name. And after London was bombed by Gotha bombers, they realized that they could not keep that name for much longer, so they actually enacted that the name changed to Windsor. And a lot of the whole question of the stability of the monarchy, the long-term popularity of it, and the perceptions are all kind of a very long play in that. And when you get into some of the scenes where Philip's kind of pitching, how do we reach out to people during the coronation and things like that, that's what he's got in his mind.
You were, I guess, a little surprised by my reaction. What made you surprised that I would be sympathetic towards Prince Philip, Alicia?
I don't know. For me, so Philip is very well acted, and I think fairly accurate in the role he had to play. But maybe this is just my view on the monarchy. It's very much the line that King George said to Philip, she's the job. That's the whole, you married her knowing that she was going to be the reigning queen. You were not. That's the job. that's the role. That's the life. You signed into it. Like, the very first time you even meet Philip, he's on his knees renouncing his royal titles. And like, that's the life he signed into. And I'm just like, I almost get a little frustrated with the show, because they want us to be so sympathetic to him, and I'm like, no, you know what? He needs to support her. That's the role he signed up for. I don't know. That's okay. I get frustrated with that character.
I 100% see your perspective. I think maybe because I'm not as invested in the monarchy, and well, I hear your words, and I know exactly what you're saying, and I think to varying degrees you're 100% right. There's still the human element to him. Yeah, that's the job, but still, you gotta be a man. You gotta be your own man. And so where does the delineation lie between you have to do your duty, but you also have to be your own person? Or is it that you are 100% always doing the job and you never get to be your own person? And even if you enter into that willingly, it's kind of like a grass always greener situation. I don't know if one could ever have their eyes 100% open to what that ultimately means, to always be in the service of the crown and to never being able to live your own life. Because that sounds like a personal nightmare to me. Now, granted, I didn't marry into royalty, but I bristle at the thought that I can't tell my father-in-law what I think of his opinion of MMA. It's a very poor opinion, and he lets me know it every time. And I have to go, Yeah, no, absolutely. MMA is more violent than football. Sure, absolutely. When are we leaving? So, I mean, I think that's where I'm coming from.
No, I completely understand that.
Okay.
I don't know. It's definitely not a life most people would want. That's for sure. Personally, I've seen it up close. When William and Kate came to Calgary, oh my God, how many years ago? 7 years ago?
7 years ago.
7 years ago, I was part of the team that did just a tiny sliver of their tour here. And I got to see up close the amount of work it is just to do a tiny portion of that tour, and the life and the how rigid your entire existence is. Definitely not a life I would sign up for, but it's a life. Philip is one of the few that was actually born into it. He wasn't born into that particular monarchy, but he was born into a monarch.
Yeah, and there's an episode kind of going to the point, just using the royal tours as an example. There's an episode later on, I want to say it's Pride and Joy, but I could be wrong, where Elizabeth and Philip go on a royal tour, and they are hitting 8 and 9 locations a day for how long was the tour for? 23 weeks. 23 weeks. 23 weeks without break, going full up all day, every day. I mean, you can make the joke that the royal family is possibly the crown jewel of the British penal system.
I think about Metallica's Black Album tour, where they toured every country and almost every city in the world that they could get to, and how exhausting that was. Or the WWF's Everyone Take a Drink 80s schedule, where there was A and B towns, and there was 2-a-days, and you lived on the road. I want to say the WWF schedule in the Hogan era was like 300 days, 320 days, somewhere in there. Pat Mullen, if you're out there, shoot me a message on Facebook. Let me know what the number was. But they lived on the road, and anyone that's ever lived on the and we're talking. I just named Metallica and wrestlers. Certainly not the high point of royalty in either case. When Hogan dropped the big leg on somebody, he could go to the Marriott at the outside the Nassau Coliseum and and toss a few back. You can't really, I guess, do that when you're Queen Elizabeth and Prince frickin' Philip. You're not at the Marriott drinking booze when it's all over.
Yeah, and that's that's almost another kind of theme that kicks in the show, is that up till this point, the press and stuff like that were much more willing to give the royal some space. And, they start... Space, respect, some level of deference. And you start to see that gradually erode as some events happen in the show. I'm trying to remember where we are on stuff.
Well, they still, it shows certain points where there's one episode while they were on the tour, or I think it's while they're on the tour, where Elizabeth and Philip get into a fight, and it happens to get caught on camera. And I believe they're in Australia. Yeah. And the cameraman actually takes out the film and hands it to Elizabeth and says it's a gift for the Queen. Yeah. That would never happen nowadays. That would be the first thing on TV. I
was going to say, that shit would be on Facebook instantaneously. That would be a live feed.
Yeah, exactly.
And credit where credit's due, as part of that scene, like Elizabeth walked up there expecting she'd have to do something for them. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to give you a 5-minute exclusive. I have to give you a quote or something like that. And they said, no, Your Majesty, you may just have this and away you go. And that's kind of been another layer of invasion that, these people, yes, they live a very, in some ways, splendid life, but in some ways, and they talk about this, a very cold life because of some of the places that they live in, and you can't necessarily make where you live a home. And that's another level of intrusion that you have. There's a reason that, there's a lot of speculation when you see a new member of the family come in, whether it be, Kate Middleton, who, the Duchess of Cambridge, who actually, I believe, briefly broke up with William before they married. because she had to come to terms with the fact that this was going to be her whole life. And I think even when you look at Meghan Markle, and I know you're a Suits fan, and I mean, she's used to being a celebrity, but the kind of glare that you have when you're a member of the royal family, and to point out, in no way do the royal family consider themselves celebrity because they are an institution. Like, it's terrifying. It's got to be terrifying.
Yeah, like I said, in a lot of ways, it sounds like a nightmare.
This season's interesting because it kind of shows how it's become that. So the coronation, when they decide to put it on TV, the very next episode when the journalists are deciding what stories to run, and they say, oh, like, we wouldn't have done a story about Margaret and Peter in the past, but wait, they let us into the coronation. They've become public figures now. Now it's their fair game.
Right. Let's talk about, before we move on, anything else about Philip, Alicia, that you wanted to talk about?
I feel for Philip as a character. I think the one I struggle with him is the party boy. I don't doubt that was probably true, but I struggle seeing him like taking off to parties all the time, and I get my personal frustrations up. But I understand that that's probably was the life, and that's the way it happened.
Mm-hmm. I've got one funny anecdote from real life that kind of describes, and I think this is kind of where it goes to nailing the personality of the character. So there's a very big Scottish element to the current royal family. The Queen Mother, Elizabeth's mother, who was also called Elizabeth, was actually a daughter of a very prominent Scottish family. She grew up in a castle in Scotland, and they'll go up to Scotland and show off that a little bit. But as a result, the royal family actually goes to a castle called Balmoral for their summers, and the men all don kilts. The first time Philip had ever gone up there, he was less than impressed, and as opposed to doing a bow when wearing a kilt, he actually curtsied. At least to say, no one was impressed.
Third-in-law especially.
So he's a little bit of a shit by nature.
Okay. Interesting.
But Philip in real life is actually, he's known for his philanthropy. Like, he's actually very well known for his philanthropy in the UK.
Is he as dumb as Eddie Izzard makes him out to be?
I think he's a man of his time. So some of the things that he says and some of the things that people make jokes of, you have to remember his age and the time he grew up in, and some of those things haven't changed.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, some of the older royals are, I'd say, even into Charles's generation, are a bit far out of touch. Like, they don't relate to people as well because they've had that much larger gap. I mean, we'll see if they cover it once they get 2 or 3 seasons down the line. But apparently, up until his adulthood, Charles actually had somebody who put the toothpaste on his toothbrush.
I want to watch Black Mirror with Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. I think that would be fascinating. Speaking of fascinating, my second favorite character in this whole first season, what I've been able to watch up to this point, is John Lithgow as Winston Churchill.
Yep.
And with a lot of, let me just talk about John Lithgow for just a moment. You know, there's 2 John Lithgows. There's the serious actor, you know, I go all the way back to he's the preacher in Footloose who didn't want dancing. You know, there's a John Lithgow who's an extremely talented actor, and he is at his prime in this show. He is magnificent as Winston Churchill. Then there's silly John Lithgow, who I can't stand. And
I love silly John Lithgow.
Oh, Third Rock from the Sun and Daddy's Home 2, which I did not see, but you know, Andrew's listened to enough Damn You Hollywood to hear me and Robert lambast comedy, you know, as it's written in America. Not a fan. At least not a fan of the comedy movie.
Mark Wahlberg, since Robert's not here right now.
By all means.
No, I wasn't going to say it. I just know Robert always mentions how much he hates Mark Wahlberg. So.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm not going to fight that fight without him being here. It's not fair. But yeah, I don't know how much of my podcasts Andrew has subjected you to, Alicia, and I do mean subjected. But we, Robert and I have gotten into a lot of sissy slap fights over Mark Wahlberg. It's just, between that and Transformers, it's the never-ending battle. In any case, I'm not a fan of silly John Lithgow, and it was a real pleasure to watch him as Winston Churchill. But I think now, as far as what actually happens in the show, some of my favorite John Lithgow moments, I'll call them Churchill moments. One, him reading in the bathtub and him adjusting and the water overflowing, and the poor secretary. Boy, poor secretary gets hit by a bus. Yeesh. That was a little hard to watch. And I just watched The Punisher. So there was that. But every time, Philip made this huge deal about the name and about living in the house that he had just renovated. And he was like, you have to do this. It's like me talking to my wife about what I need the kids to get done while I'm at work. Like, they have to clean their rooms, okay? I am depending on you. Get this done, and he's talking to her in much the same way. You get this done, okay? You have to take the fight here to the appropriate people. And she's talking to John Lithgow, and John Lithgow just makes this face like she shit on his shoes. No, you can't live in the house. What's wrong with you people? No, they can't take his name. Like, Ken, are you mad? It's like out of context and without any real connection to what's going on. As an observer, it came across as comical to me. What did you guys think of? I mean, you can talk about the bathtub moment if you want. That was personal to me. I thought it was funny. But just there's a couple of there's a couple of interactions they have where John Lithgow, if you could see the thought bubble, is like, I want to strangle you right now. How are you so bad at this? You can't do these things. For God's sakes, just do the job the way it was meant to be done. I miss you, Father. Go ahead, Alicia.
Well, I have to say, I do agree that this is one of the best characters in the show. He does such an awesome job portraying such a unique person and personality in history. And I love the fact that he's got, like, the hunch over the whole time, and he's got, like, the body movements that you associate with with that character. And I love the interactions between him and Elizabeth, especially after his secretary gets hit by the bus, and he comes back and the light shines into the room, and you can see that she's debating on, like, whether to just, like, lay into him or just give up on it, and she lets it go, and you can see, like, he doesn't want to show relief, but he just has this, like, little glint in his eye, like, sucker, I got you. I did it. And he does a great job. Like, he's subtle in it, but, like, it's awesome. It's definitely the best character, I think.
And that gets turned on its head in episode 7.
True.
Where she does lay into him.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
No, she lays into the other guy.
Well, she lays into him in the manner a queen lays into somebody, which may actually be more terrifying.
Very politely.
Very measured. I was going to say very measured, I would assume.
I'm not mad at you. I'm disappointed.
There's that whole, just a side issue here, that whole bit with the London fog, I found fascinating, especially his reaction to it, because it's so modern. That conversation could be taking place now. It's just weather. Yep. Polar ice caps melt. Polar bears die. If you've listened to enough Rush Limbaugh, and Lord knows I have, he has very much said those things. It's like, the liberals are making a huge deal out of these incremental changes in weather. It's just weather. It happens, and it'll pass. There's no such thing as global warming. Gosh, it's hot in here. that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
You.
so yeah, it was a very telling scene, and I really enjoyed that episode just because it so speaks to modern times. Don't you think, Andrew?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, I've got to put Winston Churchill in some context here, and going back, you're gonna love episode 7 and episode 9 because they're very Churchill focused, and I mean, let's just say Winston Churchill is one of the more unique characters of history. I mean, like I said, he served his country for 50 years. He was very much I think the closest American character I could find to this would be Theodore Roosevelt, who was like, I want to lead troops up hills and everything about that. And then I'm going to write the story about myself being awesome as well. Like, he made a point of, out of all the leaders coming out of World War II, he was the first one to get a biography out because he knew the first guy to get the draft out had the prevailing version of history. And he's very concerned about the concept of empire. He's very concerned about keeping things the way they are, very much in that way. In the 1930s, he loved to rail against two people on the planet, Adolf Hitler and Mahatma Gandhi.
Really?
Just because he wanted an independent India. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was asking about Gandhi, but you were starting to answer it. He was railing against Gandhi because Gandhi wanted, go figure, India for the Indians. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And to him, I mean, India was referred to as the crown jewel of the British Empire, and it was a completely radical thing at the time. I mean, he was seen as that, and I mean, that's kind of very much Churchill. He's concerned about his legacy. He's concerned about the legacy of the country, the standing of Britain, and I mean, obviously there's some level of a dissonance there because as much as Britain was and is a great country, in 1952 to 1955, it was seriously weakened. Like they mentioned that people were still on rations of the Second World War. Britain's still paying off World War debts right now.
At the risk of being moderately irritating and sounding like a dullard, I have to reference another Eddie Izzard joke. And you reminded me of it as you were talking about Churchill. The idea of having to give back the empire, and so Eddie Izzard sort of imitating somebody, a British person giving back portions of countries. He's like, what's that behind your back? Oh, that's India. Give it back. Oh, okay. And what's that one? Oh, that's the Falkland Islands. We need that for strategic sheep purposes. So on that level, I get the idea of when you've had a strong an empire as Britain had, and they were part of the winning side in 2 wars. They were part of the winning side. To come away in the late 40s and the 50s as having to give away the empire, I could see where people who were long-standing in politics and leadership would feel like this just goes against nature. This goes against everything we believe to be true. And, of course, white man's burden was a thing at the time, so I get it.
Yeah. And I don't want to spoil it, but once you get into the later half of the season and some of the stuff that Anthony Eden's dealing with, specifically in relation to Egypt, like that's going to set up Britain and France and Israel almost starting World War III. Like it kind of almost, it's going to put the point on some level the decline of British power.
Alicia, talk to me about Princess Margaret. And now I've set all of these up with some degree of discussion. I've gone for a few minutes on each character. Here's where I'm going to go to shrug my shoulders, look at you, and go teach me. Tell me about Princess Margaret.
Princess Margaret, she's a fascinating woman because she's Elizabeth's younger sister. She's always been kind of in the shadow. You have to keep in mind that Elizabeth and Margaret weren't supposed to be in the throne. When their dad took the throne and they realized that Elizabeth was going to be next, their life completely changed. Their relationship probably completely changed because suddenly Elizabeth's path was set for her and Margaret's isn't. I love in the show that Elizabeth and Margaret, the costumes really reflect who they start becoming. Margaret is the modern woman. She's the stylish one. She's the woman on the town. She gets to go to the parties. She's got the personality. She's got the affairs. She's the one having fun. And Elizabeth is the duty, and she's dressed always properly, and she stays very much in her suits and her dresses, and you can kind of see them growing further and further apart. And Margaret, her relationship with a married man, which back then was a big, big no-no. Now, at the time, people don't talk about, this show is interesting because it mentions the pre-relationship to when he was still married. I don't know if that part is fiction or fact.
Yeah.
But just the fact that she even became involved with a man who had gotten divorced was a huge, huge deal. And I think a lot of people watching the show now are going, well, so what? It's not that big of a deal. He's divorced. He's only divorced once. And hey, he was married for a long time. It's not that big of a deal nowadays. Even modern times, you look at the current match, Harry and Meghan, have become a huge controversy because she's a divorcee. This is not this. And so if you go back 50 years, and this was huge controversy back then, and still to this day, Margaret is always been a very unique character in the royal family, in that she was, I don't want to spoil anything for season 2, but she becomes a divorcee herself, which is huge controversy. But that relationship with Townsend kind of sets up the difference between keeping things the way they are and the way that society is changing.
Andrew, anything? No, that makes tons of sense. Andrew, anything on? Okay, so before I go to you, Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and tell you all what an idiot I am. So they keep saying Peter Townsend, and I'm reading on the Wikipedia Peter Townsend, and I'm like, the guy from The Who? Wrong guy.
Yes.
You know what? I think since the series started, that Peter Townsend has moved up on the Google search results.
Yeah.
I think he now comes up first.
The guy from The Who, where also read The Kingdom? That's crazy. All right. We're here to teach you, ladies and gentlemen, on the Rattling Broadcasting Network.
Yeah.
Peter Townsend is not Peter Townsend. They're two different people.
No. I'll let you go ahead.
I don't think I have a lot to add to what Alicia said, though I will bring up one fascinating thing you pointed out to me relative to that. But and any turns of phrase aside, Margaret wears the pants a lot, in the most literal phrase possible, and that was like as you can say, it was a tremendously modern, shocking thing.
The reason he mentions this is I always have a conversation with my grandmother that she did not wear pants until she was until the 60s, because women didn't wear pants, and Margaret very quickly in the 50s is the first one to be wearing pants, and she's always in modern fashion and stuff, and I was pointing that out to Andrew while we were watching the show.
Another character I found interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Who did you find interesting?
Okay. Another character I found interesting, knew nothing about him, have no idea where he's going or what he's all about, but somebody I was immediately fascinated with is Alex Jennings as Edward, Duke of Windsor, the former king who abdicated the crown so that he could marry Wallis Simpson, who I have no idea who she is, but apparently he wasn't supposed to marry her. So tell me, Andrew, if you know anything about that situation, what that marriage was all about, why that was scandalous, why he felt the need to abdicate the throne, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, okay, so, Edward, Duke of Windsor, or David was his actual given name. Edward was his regal name. That's a thing where they basically, you don't necessarily have to reign under the name you're given. Elizabeth chose to retain her name, and in some cases it changed. Did you ever see the King's Speech?
No, I have not seen the King's Speech. I know of it. I know what it's about, but I don't.
it's worth checking out, and it's actually about Elizabeth's father. So he was Prince Albert, and then when when the abdication happened and he chose to reign, he chose actually his father's regal name of George for the purposes of continuity. Anyway, that's kind of an aside, but we all know what station we're on, and asides are perfectly okay. Anyway, so yeah, Edward VII. So the basic situation there was, and I continue to try and unravel what happened with the abdication, and anything regarding divorce and the royal family and their role also being the heads of the Church of England gets really, really complicated. But basically, he ascended to the throne. I believe he was already involved with Wallis Simpson, who is an American socialite. She had already been twice divorced, and under a very strict interpretation of Anglican church law, basically a woman, particularly one who's involved in the royal family, should not have a living husband. And to which,
not even a woman, a man as
or
well.
a man as well. But I mean, I think with a lot of things they throw a harder burden on the women than they do the men. In any case, basically, the king said, "I want to marry Wallis Simpson." They said, "No, she's divorced. You cannot." Okay, fine. I'm taking my ball and going home. And he abdicated at that point.
Now you're missing a piece. So you also have to remember that royal marriages have to be.
They have to be accepted
by not just. It's not just a family matter. It's a government matter. So the Parliament actually has to give consent for a royal person, especially I think even currently the top 6 royals still have to get consent from the government to marry. And at the time, the government was a very conservative government, and there was no way they were going to let their king marry an American socialite who was twice divorced. She was well known in social circles as they were pretty positive that she was just going to be a scandal the entire time.
Yep. There were also some political concerns around Wallis and actually around Edward VII as well. So he was a little bit of a sympathizer with some guys with armbands on the continent at the time. This was so much so after he abdicated, and they show this in the show, they moved him to France just to get him out of the country, and there's actually some scenes about that later in the show that deal with that. During the Second World War, they actually made him the governor of the Bahamas because there had been rumors, and there's a question as to how valid these were, that if in some case the Germans actually invaded Britain, they were going to bring him back and put him back on the throne because he was quite a fan of Hitler.
Why does the government give a shit who marries who?
Because the crown is not just the head of state, it's head of church. So they have to abide by it. So up until very, very recently, I don't know exactly the year, anyone marrying into the family actually had to convert to being part of the Church of England, because they are not just the head of state, they are the head of the church. So church and state are not separate here.
No, and you know what? As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, that's right, Church of England, got it. And as an American, it's such a bizarre concept. You understand what I'm saying? It's the idea that, like in this country, other than you're having tax exempt status if you're a church, and there's political intertwinings, in terms of support. It's one of the pillars of the Republican Party. Religion is, but the idea that if a president would or a congressman or a senator would weigh in on someone's personal choices that way. I mean, there may be discussions behind the scenes of that. You probably shouldn't marry that hooker, but to be so formal about it and so forthright, in terms of, no, you're not going to marry this person, you're going to marry that person because Church of England. It's like just saying it out loud is like it's jarring, but I totally get it. Like I get I get the culture. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and I mean it's not as hard and fast as it seems either. And like I said, this is where this gets so complicated because it kind of depends on what time you're in. For example, in the 1800s, Benjamin Disraeli was a prime minister of Great Britain. He was Jewish, and he was quite a popular prime minister, actually. So it's kind of, though I can't even remember the last time they actually had a. Or actually, wait a second. Tony Blair was a Catholic.
I'm not sure.
I think he was Catholic, actually. So, but yeah, and I think, I mean, you know, to talk about how big of a deal the whole royal marriage thing was, in 2011, prior to the birth of Prince George, they had what was called the Perth Agreement, where basically all the Commonwealth countries got together and basically said, here's our guidelines for any new royal succession. And then every country had to go and pass a bill in their respective government to say that we're adopting this as a part of our constitution.
We didn't.
Yes, we did, actually. It got overturned. There were 2 court challenges in Canada over it.
Is there anything to their relationship between David and Elizabeth? What I've seen up to this point is she welcomes his point of view, his advice. Does that go anywhere? Does he stab her in the back at any time? Is there a plot afoot, or is he genuinely in her corner, Alicia?
Oh, Andrew's getting ready to answer. I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me that Elizabeth would ever turn to him for advice without her father and having no one around her with context of how what that role entails and what that role defines. I think he's a great character in the show to give context to why duty is so important and why the crown should come before everything else. He's the tale of what not to do. And he's constantly brought up as such, and even he brings himself up as such. And I think that's why he's a great character to have in the show. Whether or not that has context to what happened in real life, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of going into some of that, a lot of his motivations as you continue to go down the series are part of his deal when he was exiled. And like I said, there's a scene in one of the later episodes talking about basically him and George having the conversation of saying, okay, that's fine, but get out of the country. And he said, okay, fine, you're going to pay me. As some of it, a lot of the conversations around keeping his allowance long term. And the other side of it is that there's a lot of members of the royal family, and I think some of this is harbored to this day, who basically blame him for killing George VI, Elizabeth's father. Because he wasn't prepared to be the actor who plays it captures it fairly well, but it's George VI had a noticeable stammer, and that's what the King's speech is all about, is him going to a speech therapist. But he was never a guy who wanted or expected or any of those things to become king, and especially when he was king during the Second World War, basically the stress and 40 cigarettes a day ended up killing him at 54.
I'm guessing the cigarettes didn't help, no.
Yeah, but he's very much held responsible for the damage that it did, and I think there's some lines to that, if not in this episode, then definitely later on when he comes back to say that, you know, you basically killed your brother, who was the responsible one. Mm-hmm. And it's he's definitely kind of an interesting character in that respect. And again, like Alicia said, he's this great foil for duty versus non-duty.
The Walt Disney Company has done a great job of putting into the minds of children how great it is to live in royalty. What a great thing to be a princess, to be a prince, to be a king, to be a queen. It is fantasy on par with being in Star Wars or something along those lines. People just think it's the best. And I hear this guy say, you won't let me get involved in any private industry, and then you cut off my allowance. How the hell am I supposed to live? What's wrong with you people? I'm slightly adjusting that, but the gist of what he's saying, that's the, and it goes back to the whole Prince Philip thing, is you have set up this rubric, this structure for me to live in that I am brushing up against, and then I am trying to live within the parameters you've set, and then you go and you make my life that much more difficult. You can't have it both ways. You can't expect me to live this way and then not give me the tools to live this way. And I love that. I love the fact that he, in his somewhat dispassionate performance, says that outright. Like, nope, this isn't going to work. Not the way you're asking me to work it. Go ahead, Alicia. You started to chime in there.
No, I was thinking that's a really good point. I never thought of it that way. I don't know. I really think he was just such an interesting character. I never really learned much about his abdication in school, or really my history knowledge with the royals goes really to King George, and then that's it. So learning about him through the show was fascinating, because exactly that, like, he's kind of torn. He's not part of the royal family, but he's not part of the public either. He's not. He doesn't really belong anywhere.
And him and from, we only kind of see him as this somewhat bitter, abdicated king. He was actually, and this is one of the reasons they were so worried, especially about some of those rumors during the Second World War, is that he was actually on a personal level, quite gracious and quite personable. There was a story, and I just came across this randomly. One of the few royal duties, he was king for under a year. One of the few kind of big royal duties he did was open a memorial to a Canadian battle called Vimy Ridge in, I want to say, 1936. And that was one of those opportunities where he came, he gave a speech, and there were several thousand Canadian war veterans there. And he mingled with the crowd for a few hours, and they absolutely adored him.
To be fair, even when he abdicated, the public loved him.
Yeah.
The public loved him. The public, I mean, they weren't in love with the idea of him marrying who he wanted to, but they loved the idea that he was giving it up for love. That it kind of made royalty more human. It made them less that, I guess, divine, or at that
made
role
him a folk
they used
hero.
to. Yeah,
I would say,
but
folk hero would seem to be the right term.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I struggle with him as a character in this, because I don't know if I see him as that bitter in life. I don't know. Everything I've read, he became a partier afterwards. I started reading about him after I started watching the show, and like him and his wife were quite like the social people.
Interesting. Those were the major points that I wanted to hit on. Obviously, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, Churchill, David, and I wanted to talk about Margaret. That was my agenda. So I'm going to throw it back to you guys now. A phrase I like to use here on the show and on any of my shows, Alicia, is burning desires, something I picked up in my years of doing therapy. Since I became a social worker, I always say, do you have any burning desires? Anything that you feel like we should have covered on this podcast that we haven't yet? And so that's what I want to throw over to you guys now. And this, it doesn't have to be about characters. It could be about scenes. Could be about any part of the show that you want to bring up. What are your burning desires here, Alicia?
Just trying to think of mine.
Would you like me to go to Andrew first? You wanna take a minute? Okay.
I've got to.
Yeah. I think we've covered off the scenes and the characters really well. I mean, the acting in this show is impeccable. One other thing on Churchill, I gotta give John Lithgow credit, because coming in as an American to play Winston Churchill has got to be intimidating, and he nailed it there. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of fun craft stuff in this series. Like, as you go on, you start to notice that a lot of these episodes have kind of a storytelling device around them, whether it be flashbacks or whether it be coming back to one theme. The episode on the fog's a good example, because they're always coming back to the Chiron of what day of the week it is. Later on in the episode, they're kind of, it's all revolving around painting on some level. So from kind of a filmmaking point of view and having some variety in your series on how you tell your stories, then it's quite a bit of fun that way. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is the general look of the show, and basically how how stellar it is. I mean, Netflix is blowing the bank on this one. I think I've heard budget ranges for the entire series of when they do all 6 seasons of being about $600 million. And you can tell that, like, they're shooting on film grade stuff. Some of the later episodes, they go up to Scotland and they're doing some of the big vistas there, and the shots are just absolutely gorgeous. And they're spending a lot of money on this to make this look on a film. I mean, like I said, Netflix is very much betting the house on this, particularly now since House of Cards is kind of imploding.
I think this is well worth the money. I mean, this is a highly decorated show. I was looking at the Wikipedia here. I mean, yeah, the list of accolades is like retarded long. It's won just a couple of them. American Film Institute Award, Top 10 Program of the Year, won. John Lithgow won a Best Supporting Actor in a Drama. It won a Golden Globe for Best Television Series. Claire Foy won Best Actress, Golden Globe. John Lithgow won a Screen Actors Guild for Best Male Actor. Claire Foy, Best Female. And this just goes on. It won a Satellite Award. It's won. Looks like it won a BAFTA. John Lithgow won an Emmy. So yeah, I mean, without going too far into sort of the minutia of this sort of thing, Netflix is in a heated competition with Disney and some other outlets in terms of producing content and getting eyeballs to watch their products and pay and pay the fees, which just went up. They need shows like this. They need these shows. They need the Marvel shows. They need all the children's programming that they've got. I mean, my kids don't have a cable box. They have an Apple TV. And they pretty much just watch Netflix. Yours too?
Yep.
Ours too.
Yeah.
I don't think I struggled this year for the holidays because I realized that they never see a commercial. They had no clue what toys were out there.
That's probably a good thing. You handle that by taking them to the store and let them walk around and let them, like I do with my 3.5-year-old, just like, Jonas, go play with what you like. Okay. And then I can see it, because the little bit that they have watched commercials, oh God, you never hear the end of it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yep. One other kind of final interesting thing about this show that's going to be happening, I mean, season 2 just hit Netflix, so we'll probably watch that in the next little while. But as part of this plan, like I said, they're doing 6 seasons of this, basically covering all 60 years of Elizabeth II's reign. And every 2 years they're going to recast the show.
Yes.
So basically we get our current cast for this season, and then they're bringing on a new cast for seasons 3 and 4, and then another new cast for seasons 5 and 6.
Yeah, I'm into it, man. I'm gonna keep with it. I'm gonna finish the season, and eventually I'll get to season 2. When I do get to season 2, I'll have to have you back on to discuss it, and we'll keep this going until it ends. This is not the typical thing that I would normally be attracted to, but now that I'm in it, much like that's how Breaking Bad started with me. Breaking Bad wasn't something I cared to watch. Everybody and their brother told me what a great show it was. And then, it took me a couple episodes, but eventually I got hooked. They've done an amazing job with this, and it's definitely worth, sticking out to the end. Alicia, I'm going to let you go ahead and have the last word here before we start to close out.
The only thing that I realized we didn't really touch on, but it's probably because you haven't had a chance to see the last episodes, is the relationship between Elizabeth and Margaret. I think that's one of the reasons that Claire won as many awards as she has. That all those scenes that she has with Margaret in the last few episodes, where she struggles between wanting to be a good sister versus wanting to be a good queen, are just, I think, some of the best things I've seen on TV in a long time. And I really love what's coming out of that dynamic. And I'm excited to see what comes up in season 2. I know the history, so I'm curious to see how much of that history they show.
Okay. Well, I think then we're going to call it an evening. If everyone's gotten out all they feel like they need to say. I think we've done a good job of summarizing season 1. And as I said, if Alicia, I hope you had a good time tonight and you're willing to come back. Andrew, I know you'll want to come on and discuss season 2, so we'll try to get that scheduled sometime in 2018. If you've heard any of my podcasts recently, you know I've already started making the schedule for 2018. So I gotta figure out where we're gonna shove this thing. But we'll get to it. We got to it this year, and I think what we planned this over the summer. We were gonna talk about this.
Yeah, I think we planned it in like August.
Right. So
I think we met after like Dunkirk.
Right. So speaking of which, Andrew, there's another show. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Jason Momoa, good old Aquaman, is on the show. It's got 2 seasons, 6 episodes apiece.
Frontier?
It's really nice and short. Yeah, Frontier. I don't know if that was up your alley, but it's something I think I want to watch and talk about.
Let me give it a watch and I'll see what it is. I had a friend of mine at work describe it as an ultra-violent Canadian Heritage Minute.
Okay.
I'll have to send you what the other Canadian Heritage Minutes are before you fully appreciate how hilarious that is.
Fair enough.
They're basically history.
Okay. Give it a look-see. If it's something you feel passionate about talking about, we'll get it done. If not, I'll just watch it for my own amusement. Alicia, did you have a good time tonight? Was this? And I know you. I'm sure if you're anything like my wife, you were like, podcast, go fuck yourself. I don't want to do this. But you came on. You were a trooper, and I certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it was good. I'll admit I was apprehensive. I guess that's the right word of coming on. But no, this is good. It's a great show, and I'm glad I could give my perspective on it.
I appreciate you being here, especially as knowledgeable as you both are. It was helpful for me. It helped me gain a better understanding of what it was I was watching. So certainly appreciate you. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close out here. Alicia, this is the best part of any one of my podcasts. This is where we do plugs. I don't know what creative endeavors you've got going on or any projects you're passionate about, but now's the time to tell the world about them or where they can find you or anything else you'd like the Rattlegion Broadcasting universe of fans to know about.
Oh. Unfortunately, I don't have any myself. I wish I had more time to do some. The one thing I will plug is one of my good friends has Victoria has this amazing new podcast called Girls Tries Life, and she interviews powerful women all throughout Canada, and she's also reaching out to the States, and she's just getting a unique perspective from different women on different life issues, and so I'm going to plug that.
Outstanding. Thank you for being on the show. Andrew, you know what to do. Go ahead and do it.
Alrighty then. As usual, I will plug where I train, which is Havoc JKD and Esteem Martial Arts in Calgary. So you can find us on Facebook or at calgaryjkd.com. That's under the ever tremendous Seafood J. Cooper and Sarah Jade. And we're part of, if you're not in the Calgary area and you are looking for some of the best martial arts training, combat training that you can find, definitely check out the Jeet Kune Do Athletic Association under the ever amazing Sifu Harinder Singh Sabharwal. You can find us online at jkdaa.com or jkdathletics.com.
All right. Next week is all Star Wars all the time, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Princess Leia on source material. If you've ever listened to a source material show, what Jesse's been doing recently at the end of every show is a gag reel. He takes the entire conversation and cuts out where we go off the deep end, which is frequently. If you've never listened to a source material show all the way through and heard the gag reel, listen to this next one, especially if you're into the band Austrian Death Machine. You'll know why when you hear it, and you'll make all those connections. Just trust me on this one. Between the Austrian Death Machine imitations, this will be a fun one. So next Monday, Princess Leia on source material. Of course, we've got The Last Jedi on Damn You Hollywood. Andrew, you joined us for The Force Awakens, right?
Yes, I did.
You joining us again for The Last Jedi?
I honestly have no idea when I'm going to see it, so I can't commit myself right now. I'm looking forward to it, though.
Yep, I'm going to a fan showing, a fan event Thursday, so that's when I'm seeing it. Wednesday on the Metal Hammer of Doom is Galactic Empire's debut album, self-titled Galactic Empire. And then finally, Sean and I are going to put The Empire Strikes Back on trial. Screaming Boy should have a show for you Friday about Star Wars. You never know what you're going to get with Screaming Boy. It's a box of chocolates. That's what we got going on right now. Go ahead and give that Rattledge and Broadcasting Facebook page a like. And you can also check out our content sharing with W to the Max. We have all of their wrestling and MMA and sports content, and they take all of our nuts and bolts and twigs and berries and whatnot, all of our various shenanigans on the Rattledge and Broadcasting Network. All right, so this has been TV Party Tonight for Andrew Graham and his lovely wife, Alicia. Again, I greatly appreciate you coming on. Be well, be safe, and behave.
It's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.